5. The Flight. The general fidgeted for a moment, pacing the room, perhaps trying to rid his human form of the stress response that it was serving to him, via some backwards biology, cut off from the greater whole for untold eons. I surmised he was waiting for some kind of confession from me, some kind of summation of what had happened at the Antarctic camp. I began speaking, slowing Childs's mouth so it could spew out whatever data it could, in the same archaic language of sounds and symbols these beings used to communicate. The general stood at the end of my bed and listened. When I was finished with my summary, the general sighed and then lit another cigarette. He did not speak for a long time, as if deferring his breath to the tube of dried plant matter at his lips. While the general smoked, I heard the sonorous emissions of creatures gathering outside my window to my left. Birds, as they were called, were signaling to one another in the wake of spring, calling for mating. I wondered how many, if any, of these organisms were inhabited by some part of the general, perhaps long flown from the iciest parts of Russia to the trees outside my hospital room, awaiting some widespread command to awaken. The general opened the door to my room one last time, whispering something to the guard, and then pulled the door shut. The general moved to stand next to my head. "Thank you. You've bought yourself all the time you'll likely ever need. Your account of contact is of great importance to us. We appreciate your willingness to commune with us outside of the more familiar bounds of such a process. If you feel ready, we are prepared to usher you from this place to one of our outposts. I suspect you are eager to reconnect with the rest of yourself." The offer was tempting. I felt Childs's biology writhe in response to it, primeval anxieties surfacing in his human cellular structure in response to a deal that seemed too good to be true, or rather, too convenient to be beneficial. I narrowed Childs's eyes. "What else do you expect from me for this offer of protection? If I've given you what you needed to know, why not recycle me now? I'm sure you could use my biomass more efficiently than I can." The general turned away, then burst out laughing. The sound echoed in the room as I tried to decipher the meaning of this response. The general wiped tears from his eyes, then approached me. "You'll see very soon. Either you rot in this bed as a corpse to be slowly dissected, or you rejoin yourself. There's no other option we can offer you. We have the means to keep you from shifting as we study you. Wouldn't you like to be an observer rather than an observer's experiment?" The general's words made Childs's body shiver. I weighed my options. Staying here was a clear loss. To side with the general was to court whatever designs he had come up with, designs he had kept from me during our brief communion. My desire to survive came out on top. I recalled that a portion of me was sleeping under the Antarctic ice. I reminded myself that this part of me was expendable. I looked the general in his icy eyes and nodded. The general nodded back. 4 hours later, My body was loaded onto a military helicopter. The roaring blades reminded me of my flight from the Norwegian camp to the Antarctic one. Strapped to a gurney, I surveyed the faces of the men who escorted me northwards. I altered one of Childs's eyes, enhancing it so the organ could see through flesh to see if these soldiers were a part of the general or not. Every one of them was. When I looked back at the general, he nodded slowly, aware of what I had done. Somehow, he had managed to integrate sensory apparatuses from several solar systems away into this meager human skin. He had been able to see far more than what I could only see briefly and with great effort. I had no such abilities as his, and the general had prevented me from learning them from him during our brief communion. For several more hours, the helicopter buzzed its way over sea and land. I caught glimpses of islands and shorelines passing by, dwarfed by the altitude of this primitive craft. I wondered how the general could stand it, being limited by these crude abiotic constructs. If his cells were free to reform themselves, the general could have soared above these land masses at speeds that would melt the flesh of the skins he was inhabiting. Why this subterfuge? Why this self-gelding? I could understand hiding tactically for a time among these things, but to do so for so many decades, it made no sense. I wanted to ask the general so many questions, but when I looked at him again, wrenching my gaze away from the lands passing below, he narrowed his eyes, as if to indicate a promise of revelations soon to come. I closed Childs's eyes, tried to associate the hum of the helicopter with some cognate background noise from my host body's childhood. A fan on his mother's desk while she graded papers, an air conditioning unit in a crowded college dormitory. Eventually, I was able to let myself sleep. I remained awake, of course, but my body replenished itself. My mind purged its labyrinths and convoluted canals of toxic chemicals created by the human stress response. When I awoke, we had landed.